the slogan of Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas. Something we in the media, and here I go back to, I think, Irfan's formulation of how the media indulged in so much of rumor mongering as far as the Gujarat model was concerned, because what was the model exactly? Now we look back and we question the model, we look at the inequities along the axis of religion, caste, community. But it was that model which was propagated by media and also by a lot of well-meaning, I think, non-discerning columnists, policymakers. What was actually on the ground was not really looked at, and instead what was propagated was this great model, despite notwithstanding the violence. And here I come to the link which the essays and the introduction has made so wonderfully between the model of development and violence. You cannot dissociate one from the other if you really want to understand what electoral democracy is all about and how electoral democracy can actually function in a very technical manner, how you can actually secure a majority despite having a legacy of violence. You can actually occupy the top post and you can continue and normalize that violence. What we have seen over the last 5 years. In fact, just before Holi today, I was reading in the papers how in Allahabad an elderly Muslim gentleman was lynched. In Gurgaon, we've seen where a Muslim family, a mob arrived at the doorsteps and they were beaten up and they were asked to go to Pakistan. These stories are actually now somehow slipping off the front page and getting somewhere in the inside pages, and I see it as a way of normalizing violence, and violence going hand in hand with, let's say, what are the policies? There are so many policies now. So politics has been reduced to a set of policies, whether it's Jan Dhan.
I'm happy this book has happened. Sorry, Pralay, I have this. This book has happened because uncomfortably, and I've been feeling uncomfortable about this for a long time, as have many political scientists, democracy has been reduced to elections, particularly in the media. It seems to me and to many political scientists that elections are one moment, albeit a definitive one, in a long conversation that citizens have with other citizens, and what this conversation that citizens have with their governments. It is a mode of putting people into power, but it's also a mode of being represented, of getting your interest, your need, your aspirations represented in the public domain. Now, when you decontextualize democracy, elections, and see it as synonymous with democracy, you're putting too heavy a burden on elections. In fact, I'm very surprised that in most media circles and in the newspapers, elections are seen as if it is war. You either lose or you win. In a parliamentary democracy, elections are pretty normal. Governments get voted out of power and governments get voted into power, and they're supposed to continue the policies and, if not the perspectives of the earlier government. Now, this whole notion of making elections into war has actually decontextualized democracy, elections as well, and taken it out of the constitutive context, which is struggle over the distribution of resources, the struggle for aspiration, the struggle for dignity, and created it into a game of who wins and who loses, which I think is very dangerous because you're investing too much into elections.
I think I would like Hartosh to make his opening comments and then we can take the discussion forward. As the political editor of one of these rare magazines which has been really in the front line of questioning, interrogating the government and coming up with exclusives, which unfortunately most other media organizations are not picking up. But I think, I think like Caravan, The Wire, we are all facing defamation charges, a whole lot of them. And I would really like to hear Hartosh's experiences as a journalist, as a citizen, and as an analyst from 2014 to now.
So I will, in the course of this book, I came across Professor Uman's rather unforgettable words about our profession. I will bring my trained incapacity to bear on the problem before us. And the term here, warfare, welfare, I think it succinctly captures something we all have struggled to describe over a period of time in reporting elections. I just last night returned from Amritsar, and I have to say that suddenly we are almost living in two Indias. It's like being in a place where a cloak has lifted, some magic cloak, and suddenly the emperor has no clothes. Punjab, talking to now, I think one of the things that to me is central is that we forget that the first crafting of majoritarian India, of a majoritarian vote, actually dates back to the 84 elections. The 84 elections, I claim, is a Hindutva election. That the other was a different minority, that it was a corporate-sponsored election campaign based on national security, where a particular event, a particular death was utilized. And please see the comparisons between the death of Indira Gandhi, Godhra, and today Pulwama, and how these become electoral issues, national security, the threat indicated through an ad campaign by an agency which has been picked for this purpose, rediffusion in 1984, which is hinting at a minority that is threatening you, and this crafting of a majority. And this warfare is, I mean, is it a war against whom and welfare for whom, I think, are central questions here. And it is this model that Modi has successfully used. But the rise of Hindutva post-84 is not a coincidence. The Congress had already created a Hindutva vote that was successfully transferred. The use of another minority does not change the essential nature of the phenomena that the Congress actually set in motion in 84. The Congress declines, the BJP gains, the RSS supports the Congress in 84 is actually part of this very process that leads to what we have today, I think. And in this context, what I think we will see in 2019 is the same pattern that Modi used. Post-Godhra, you can already see it that Pulwama is being used in the same fashion. An incident where martyrs are created, and the word martyrs is very flexible. Bodies are paraded, a national discourse is created, and other is signaled across the border and their sympathizers inside the border, and the discourse of national security. In the end, this project that we have to speak about is in the end a crafting of a majority. It is not a majority. That is why I think the majoritarian term is in the making. It is an upper caste Hindu project that seeks to encapsulate and include as much of the OBCs as it can. And its failure or success lies in that very bid. We've seen that success gain some ground in 2014. And 2019 is going to be decided again by that same configuration. This minority, the upper caste Hindu minority, with its intellectual and its financial capital, is perhaps most comfortable with what we are seeing today, which is Hindutva capitalism. It is a dream come true. It is true, that is why I come back to the media, that our media owners today are most comfortable with this. You have to go back to the creation of Hindutva itself, the Gita Press. The Marwadi press that supported Gita Press are the same owners who run the media today. Their business interests are the very same interests that drive a large part of industry and corporates today. So in that sense, Modi is the culmination of a long project which brings together a certain kind of financial and intellectual capital of a minority that hopes to craft itself as a majority. And I think 2019 is going to be very much a sign of that. And I think this vocabulary is something that actually lets us imagine or see it in different ways, even though my analysis may be not something that most people may agree or disagree with. But it is this vocabulary that you have given us that is important.
Yeah, so picking up from Hartosh, Professor Chandhoke, I'm just 1984 was a watershed moment. I think I agree with Hartosh in promoting majoritarianism. We all know the role the Congress played, the role in the riots that took place during its long years of rule. But would you say that we have somewhere crossed a threshold between 2014 and 2019 in terms of rhetoric, in terms of, let's say, giving it a certain kind of respectability in verbalizing something which perhaps we used to earlier just mobilize our resources on the ground in terms of the henchmen, in terms of tactics, how to create violence. But would you say that there is a qualitative difference in the culture of that majoritarianism which we saw, let's say, in 1984 and which we have seen all through since 2014?
Yes, I think that by and large true. I mean, without undercutting the enormity of what happened in 1984 and the perpetual regret that our own people were butchered the way they were, I have to say that there is a qualitative difference between the way the so-called majority perceives other minorities and the way it perceives Islam. The formation of this particular cadre, which is the basis for the parliamentary party to come to power, is premised upon the notion of the Muslim being an oppressor, being an outsider, and therefore the whole notion of the unfinished project of the partition. And it's very worrying that again and again this whole idea is coming up, particularly in the Karnataka election. I mean, Karnataka was not even affected by the partition. They keep talking about the unfinished project of partition. There is a visceral, a very palpable, a very demonization of Islam, and this hasn't happened today, it happened in the latter part of the 19th century. What is interesting is that an intellectual argument on Hinduism, which was sparked off by Raja Ram Mohan Roy, which was in turn inspired by missionary attacks on Hinduism, and it was by and large an intellectual debate on what is Hinduism. He tried to protect Hinduism, and it's very interesting that the first book, in fact, he referred to when he was formulating his ideas on what is Hinduism is Aristotelian Islam. It is actually Arabic Islam which influences his perspective on Hinduism. By the time that debate comes to Maharashtra in the latter part of the 19th century, it is attached onto a nation-state project. And that nation-state project becomes a competitive nation-state project. And if you look at the origin of, for example, the Ram Janambhoomi processions that are carried out, which were carried out last year, and again not the Ram Janambhoomi, the Ram Navami. And Ram Navami is coming around again, so there is a frisson of fear. It started in Tilak's time. The whole notion of creating a Hindu majoritarian nation. So, in a way, institutionally, the RSS and the BJP is committed to Islamophobia. And this has been made very clear in the book by Manisha Sethi's chapter, which talks about how cleverly Modi slips from Pakistan to the internal enemy. I mean, I just feel like kind of breaking apart when I see our own people being demonized in this way. But when you run out of external enemies, you start creating enemies. Having said that, I'd also like to point out that, Irfan, your introduction, which talks about the construction of a Hindu India and equalizes kind of Savarkar and Gandhi, is perhaps not quite fair to the project of nation building. Because Hinduism was a contested field. You see, the philosopher Jain Mohanty has pointed out when the Vedas were codified in 2000 BCE, they left out a great deal of rationalist philosophies and materialist philosophies like the Charvak, the rationalist philosophies like Samkhya. Because of the Western influence and Protestantism on the codification of Hinduism, what we see is the privileging of the Vedas. Now this is worrying, I'll tell you why. Every time the Supreme Court of India has to decide on secularism or on religion, what do they consult? Radhakrishnan, History of Philosophy. 2 volumes. Radhakrishnan was an archetypical Orientalist. his construction of Hinduism completely fits in the Protestant notions of a metaphysical, rational, upper caste, Sanskritized Hinduism. But Hinduism itself is contested. It is contested, and sometimes I feel that we had adopted, for example, Charvak philosophy, and this construction of Hinduism has been made the mainstay. Maybe we would have been more sensitive to the oppression and the injustices of our own society, and not fallen into this trap which Vivekananda laid out for us, that India is the spiritual East, the West is materialistic. And the chapter on Benares, actually, I think it stands for Modi. He represents himself as a son of Mother Ganga. Now, this is very common in Hinduism. We have gone to Vaishno Devi, Mata ne bulaya hai, now Ma Ganga ne bulaya hai. This is ridiculous, almost as if they are, it's revelation. We are being invited by Mother Ganga. At the same time, he's a hardcore capitalist. Now, these two aspects which have been summed up in the chapter on Benares and which have been very ably kind of portrayed by Zoya Hassan in her piece on the Gujarat model of development, seems ostensibly on the face of it to be incongruous. But what has really happened? He has not performed on the materialistic front. But what I find, and this is my last point before I wrap up this section. What I find disturbing is that the notion of politics has disappeared from India. What it has been replaced by is the notion of governance or that of administration. How can you disagree on the number of toilets that are to be built? How can you disagree on health or on education or on giving gas cylinders? But this is not contested. Politics is always a contested venture. Now that notion, that particular perspective on how a plural society and an occasionally divided society can live together in some degree of civility, if not harmony, is completely missing, because they have created these crude binary opposites between the majority and the minority, and God knows there's no such thing as a majority. Everybody disagrees with everybody else when it comes to worship. You just have to go to Kalkaji. On one end of Kalkaji is a Devi Mandir, and you worship there with flowers and fruit. On the other end is a Kal Bhairav Mandir, that is Shiv. In his Kal Bhairav Roop, what do you offer there? What do the worshippers offer there? Red meat and alcohol. The beggars outside are in a perpetual state of intoxication. Because I had a cousin who used to go there. That's how and she told me once that. I said, what do you offer? She said, we offer single malt. I said, you give the pandit single malt, what a waste. But they don't say they're not Hindus. They are Hindus. They say we are Hindus. Now, why are these trains left out of the construction of Hindus? So, Hinduism itself, forgive me, Irfan, but I feel that unless you bring in the notion of contestation to the center stage of the construction of the nation and of democracy, we are in a trap, because politics is always contested, governance is not. With the result that more than 12 years ago in UPA 1, if not UPA 2, we were talking of the right to information, right to work, right to health, right to education. What are we talking of today? The right to life, the right not to be lynched. We are back to square one. The social contract has been reopened. We have to negotiate our relationships with each other and with the state all over again. With the result, you look at the impact. Where are our great debates of literature, of films, of music? Where are they? We don't have of aesthetics of art. We don't have a vision any longer. What is our vision? Build toilets, clean up India. So that is governance, that is administration. I'm very surprised when I used to get these SMSs saying Happy Governance Day. Governance is not my job, it's the job of the government. Why are they wishing me happy? And that too on Christmas. I feel like telling them, for God's sake, have a piece of plum pie, drink some wine, say peace be on all. You joyless carriers learn to enjoy life. But that is, governance is not contested. So what is the acme of our imagination today? A movie called Toilet, a Prem Katha? You can't even create good movies. You have Akshay Kumar holding up the Prime Minister as a project which is not a political project. And finally, one small Let Hartosh, then I'll come back later.
Because I do want to contest some of the things here, because I think it brings, or I think it brings to some of the fundamental issues that I was trying to touch upon. And this is that I would not have said this 5 years ago. But today when I hear this debate or this oft-repeated issue of Gandhi and Savarkar, of Hindutva and Hinduism, it does not interest me. I am outside that debate. Am I to watch a khada or a wrestling match being played out and its result decide my stature or my conduct or my nature of citizenship? If a Sikh, I feel this, what does a Muslim in this country imagine when that debate is being played out? And what is the issue at stake here? Why should that battle be decided as a battle between various contesting strains of Hinduism? The point is not that. The point is that where is the debate on citizenship taking place? Hinduism can lose and win the debate. I'll just finish.
I didn't focus on that. I was focusing on Irfan's notion of a Hindu nation being created. If that is all, you look at the debates with him. I'm completely in agreement with you.
Absolutely. So what I mean is that today, in this contestation, we have reached a point where the alternative to Modi is a party that is contesting the same images. So you have a more benign version of the same phenomenon. It is maybe benign, but it is still tokenistic. For the rest of us, we have to deal with a party that will assign a certain better stature, but still a certain hegemony to a certain way of believing and thinking, of a janeo, of an election conducted on temples, of an idea where the exclusion that is taking place, the exclusion of Muslims in Modi's idea of welfare in Gujarat, is matched by the Congress in its selection of Muslim candidates in Gujarat, in its attempts not to name Muslims. I have gone through Rahul Gandhi's Twitter account over the last 4 years. He has not used the word Muslim. He has not even used the word minority. So we are being told that this debate must take place only in this welfare zone. Keep out of the fact that the war is against Muslims in any case. I will not debate that. I will just make it a little more inclusive. I will make it a little more palatable. But in the end, the fact is that the hegemony now lies with a particular group and a particular kind of vision of India, where more and more people like me see no reason why I should choose between the two. We are being excluded as citizens.
Would you like to comment on the Savarkar Gandhi?
Yeah, so thank you for comments. One point I want to stress here, it was not entirely clear to me from Professor Chandhoke's observation that what is the nature of disagreement. Now, with that, I want to say one thing which would be something closer to what Hartosh has said. I think there is probably more agreement between what you are saying and what I am putting forward, namely that I think there is probably an agreement to the extent that there is a dissatisfaction with the prevalent modes of analysis, the ways in which we continue to construe politics. Okay? Now this dissatisfaction can take many forms. Okay? Mine is one, probably yours would be different. And of course, you know, it is very much in the nature of debate that we do and we should have, you know, multiple viewpoints. But what I want to say here is that the nature of contemporary debates is, and I will use this as exemplification of the larger trend. What is it? It is the following. If you have debate about nationalism and patriotism, then there are certain figures which are routinely invoked. You could use Gandhi, you could use even Ambedkar, you could use some other figures like Nehru and so forth. But if there is a danger of nationalism, then you invoke Tagore. Now what happens in these debates, certain figures from certain cultural traditions become the poles of discussion, And whether Iqbal has to say something about the dangers of nationalism or not, it is completely erased. In the last 5 years, nobody is talking about what Maulana Abul Kalam Azad has to say about it. So you become an object of discussion rather than agent of discussion. What I'm saying, and this is, in my view, I think Hartosh is very much on the hitting the point, that we have to shift the nature of this debate. So what other collectivities, what other forms of political contestation have been taking place, that is no longer in the center of discussion. So it is a transformation from an object of politics to an subject of politics. And it is there that, of course, I think my notion of politics, and probably I should make it explicit, in part I'm inspired by Jacques Rancière, the French philosopher. For me, politics is not about consensus. His idea of politics is about dissensus. When you have a dissensus, only then true politics come into being. And politics is not about just reproducing what it is, but it is also about a possible world to come. A world that doesn't exist, but it is possible. Now, I think in the realm of politics, if it is about possibility, if it is about not simply what we are, but also the possibility of what we can become. And if that becoming is excluded from the realm of politics, then I think it is going in the direction of consensus, not dissensus. What the volume does is, through different examples, through different chapters, by looking at different sites, we want to, whether it is about the river Ganges, I think psephologists or electoral analysts, so far they have not given attention to these kind of figures. So we want to bring this kind of thing, and the point that you made about 1984, I think Manisha's chapter beautifully actually speaks about it, how this idea of terrorism and all that, it was already present in 1984. I think she even uses one advertisement, So these kind of things are very much there. I want to conclude by saying a small point which has larger consequence, that majority and minority, and I think I have given this discussion through Ambedkar. These are not collectivities. Ambedkar's point was that majority is a technique of governance. It is not an statistical entity. It is a technique. So rather than talking about majority or minority, what I do here is, it is much like the term subaltern. No, I think the term subaltern, in my view, it is misnomer. One should speak about subalternated, because it is the process, because nobody is subaltern, right? Likewise, it is not minority or majority, but minoritization and majoritarianization. And Ambedkar was sensitive to this because he spoke about majority and minority as a technique of rule, a technique of domination, rather than a statistical entity, or only a statistical entity. Thank you.
Yeah, I would, some of the points raised here, and I'm now going back to the concrete election kind of strategies, which I think Hartosh is, what are our choices, which I think the introduction to the book, while redefining, I would say, electoral democracy, actually throws up, what does a secular alliance, what does it actually mean? Will it reinstate citizenship rights, just the basic right to live with dignity, or the right to live and not get lynched? What are our choices? And in this, what kind of an election process are we looking at, despite all that has happened over the last 5 years? Look at the opposition parties, the secular alliances that have not even been stitched up. So I'm throwing open the question to all of you. So for citizens, this is a critical election. I think for both majority community as well as minorities, I think I would say majority community simply because I mean, I think there are large numbers of people within the majority community who feel equally anxious as would a Muslim or a Christian or a Sikh. So what are the choices before us? How do we redefine? I mean, how do we change the language of election campaign rather than talk about, like what Hartosh said, do not name the violence, do not name the victims of violence, just talk in abstractions, which in a way actually perpetuates what it suits Modi, because then if you don't get down to the specifics and if you don't get down to naming and shaming, then what are our choices to all of you?
Yeah, okay. I think at stake, and I'm going to shift because I had recently argued in a book that secularism should be taken out of this whole notion of Sarv Dharam Sambha, which is a peculiarly Vedantic notion, does it apply to a multicultural society, and situated in the notion of equality, which is an integral part of our constitution. So we have to secularize the discourse, and when you have opposition parties talking about secularism, they're not even clear about what is meant by secularism. We have to see secularism as, let me put it this way, the fact that different communities live together, they may not interact, they may not interdine, they may not intermarry, but it doesn't mean they kill each other, right? They can live, they can say they have good reasons for believing the way they do, and we have good reasons for believing the way we do, and it doesn't mean you inflict violence on each other. The transition from this mode, which is communal, to communal violence needs a trigger. And that trigger is provided by right-wing organizations. That trigger has to be neutralized. Because at stake are four kinds of freedom, which I think in the 2019 elections have to be foregrounded. We need freedom from fear. We need freedom from want. We need freedom from discrimination, and we need freedom from sexual violence. A katwa must never happen again in India. We must never witness the ignoble spectacle of lawyers actually supporting the rapists. And we must never again see women being beaten up just because they want to go to a temple. These are the kind of social ills that have been made legitimate by this government, because NDTV figures out there was only one case of lynching in India before 2014. Now lynching has become a regular, it has become the new normal. Now this freedom from fear that somewhere someone is going to attack you, even write nasty, horrible, ugly messages on your account, just because you have expressed, has to go. So there is a phrase in political theory which says the task is to vote for the lesser evil. Yeah. Because we cannot no longer hope for the ultimate good. We have to vote for the lesser evil. That means voting for a party that is not institutionally dedicated to dividing the country and creating an enemy. That's
I just wanted to come in here that this whole theory of voting for a lesser evil, I think in theory and in practice, I think it does minimize the impact of the greater evil in that election and maybe for the next 5 years. But the culture of the evil forces, or let's say the culture of evil, stays on, because we are not really calling to account even the lesser evil. So in which case, let's say the Congress for a long time, let's say in West Bengal, some would say the Trinamool Congress after 34 years of left front. But then where does it finally, because the issues which have been raised in this book and the coded vocabulary of creating anxiety has been practiced by everybody. I mean, Muzaffarnagar 2013, Akhilesh Yadav was in power. And I think one of the essays talks about it. And it talks about it at length. So, all these things have been going on. We've been somehow accommodating and adopting this theory of lesser evil and voting accordingly. I'm not saying this 2019 perhaps is not the best moment to practice something else. Perhaps we should all, but long-term view of, like the book says, long-term view of the 2014 election, so long-term view of 2019. To me, it seems the culture of of just accommodating, hedging, putting up with, the lesser evil, doesn't it perpetuate the greater evil long term?
Then of course we have to build it. You see, what has happened is that this whole issue of welfare, this government is not interested in welfare. They have adopted the Singaporean model of giving some goods at a price. At the same time, they have demobilized civil society. Now, I think one of the basic tasks that are before us is to see that civil society stands up and we participate in dissent and pressure on the new government. I mean, all governments are absolutists. No government is immune from that. The only way that you can hold the beast in check or to keep violence at bay is to keep up constant pressure through dissent, through articulation of freedom of struggle. And that would mean actually reviving civil society. Whatever our criticism might have been of civil society earlier, you start missing something when it's no longer there. You know, that kind of issue. The media has to be restored as a spokesperson of dissent rather than as a defender of the political elite. So there are numerous tasks. I'm not saying voting, but I think we have to get rid of this trigger that has evoked passions which probably people didn't even know existed. And created an atmosphere where bad-mouthing, I grew up in independent India, I was born in independent India, I don't remember in public forums this kind of hate being expressed openly without challenge. This culture of impunity has to go. That is why I use the word the lesser evil. I'm not saying it's a preferable alternative. It is a practical, pragmatic alternative. That's all.
Yeah,
and I do not mean to disagree with someone whose work I respect. It may come across like that. But again, in this case, I think our job is not to hold the government to account after it has come to power. It is at this moment when choices are being made that we have to ask what is the alternative you are offering before us. At this point, before agreeing to vote for a lesser evil, can we be sure it is a lesser evil? Can we be sure that it will do something for civil society? Will it do something for the media? One of my young reporters happened to be around a senior Congress politician who didn't realize this was a reporter. Talking of the media, that senior Congress politician says, यार ये मीडिया ने हमें बहुत तंग किया हुआ है, जब हम पावर में आएंगे तो हमें इन्हें फिट करना है. And if this is what we are going to do, because it is this decline of institutions, of the media, of academia, of civil society that got us a Modi in the first place. And if we are going to go back to that, because at the moment Modi, we certainly can't hold him to account. He is not listening. So where are we going to direct our criticism? People say do not criticize the lesser evil. You are not saying that, but I'm saying it is precisely now at this point that we must hold that lesser evil up to account and examine and pressure and ask, what is it that you are going to do that you think should make us want you to come back to power? If we have to deal with the devil and that is where you are taking us, then we might as well find out what is in store for us rather than this false hope of half an election, of a single year in between where nothing will be done. And that is the real problem. This lesser evil brings no vision. What we are left with today is in the same way that a majority is being crafted, that we craft together something that may allow the possibility of some space for secular ideas. It itself will not be secular. Which is why I say that the time for questioning, the time for asking, the time for holding to account is right now, exactly now, before the elections rather than after.
Professor Irfan, if you just give some comments, otherwise, after that we'll just throw open the discussion.
I think one of the things which we need to interrogate is also this whole idea of choice itself. And why is it that politics has been reduced to making a choice between greater evil and then the lesser evil? Can we think of politics where we can also have a choice between the good and the evil rather than opting for greater evil or the lesser evil? And I think this cannot be understood simply in the Indian context because there is a larger international context. In America, the choice is between Republican and Democrats. I taught for 8 years in Australia. The choice is between liberal and Democrats, and actually these are not real choices. These are what might be described as more of the same. In one of the famous remarks when Chomsky was asked that, well, we should have a third party in the US, and he said that no, actually we need to have a second party, because the Democrats and Republicans, whether you take the international politics or the domestic politics, they speak the same language, and I think in the Indian context, this is also largely true. So I think if politics is about not simply consensus but dissensus and making, whether it is Farabi's vision of politics, of a virtuous city or a good city, then one has to really go beyond this and bring more options. That is number one point. Related to this, I think Friedrich Engels made a very remarkable comment. He said that the names of the political parties are always entirely misleading. Now, what is socialist about Mulayam Singh's Samajwadi Party, right?
They're not socialist, they're loyalists.
Yeah, but it is.
They believe in caste.
Yeah, so it is Samajwadi Party. So likewise, my point is that these names, and when we think about politics, we should go beyond party politics. And what the book does is that there is an underlying grammar of politics which runs across the political parties. And we need to make a shift in the grammar rather than the sentences which each party makes. And I think a conceptual long-run shift has to begin with that conceptual thinking rather than just choosing between, it is just like, toothpaste. If you go to a supermarket, toothpaste with different names, but most of them, they have 80% of the chemistry or the elements that go into the making of the toothpaste are the same. Only the names are different.
Yeah, questions?
Yeah. So I think I totally agree with Irfan when he started with his analogy of cricket, and he said, there's this warfare angle to it. If you really see, there's huge amounts of money involved, right? So if you really see, it's about the political class, which is all about making tons of money, and all of us as regular citizens, the civil society. The reason these people who have vested interests, and Hartosh kind of alluded to how it happened from 84, the community that controls the country, the business community which gets this formula right, is all about the guys who are ruling the country. For all of us as regular citizens across the strata of society, I may be an urban guy staying in Delhi, but it's the builder community which is building and breaking every rules, whereas I can't get my house plan passed. It's my maid which comes out from Bihar, right? So there is going to be an election now, and you will see that it would be not a clear mandate making one party all powerful, but it would be coalition again. And the good thing about the Indian society is that for everybody who feels that there are polls, etc., but I think the common Indian guy wants a better life, and you will see that whenever coalition happens, who thought that the India Shining campaign would fail? Everybody said they would, and they lost. And then who thought, they said, who's the political party with so many parties coming together? Wow, we had the best growth of GDP under UPA 1. So I think the common man this time around is going to surprise. I guarantee that there's going to be coalition, and it will not have a clear majority to anybody to kind of take things. And I think the common man and the magic of this country is they may not understand the scriptures or whatever. We all want to have a good life, and that's what we vote for. And time again, huge amounts of money get spent, and people feel, oh, they have the money. So it's actually about the political class who have the money, who, as Hartosh said, have always, and the parties change. We have to choose. I mean, AAP was this one new party that came out. We all believed in it. And look what AAP is. It's no different. So we have to bring in an option which is going to be a coalition. It will be a federal system. And you will see that we'll be better off. And then, those lynches, etc., they'll all stop. Because that's not what the Indian common person wants.
Thank you. There is one way of analyzing this is when you're saying that thoughts are manufactured. right? But we also have the discourse that in this big data world, governments realized as early as late 90s that they can no longer manufacture thoughts, that they can only manage thoughts. So in that sense, I disagree with you. I would say that in ascribing all the violence upon the parties and upon the governance, I think we also need to address people as carriers of violence, right?
That's why they lose.
Because no, people, I'm saying we the people as carriers of violence, and then how does your analogy, if we're looking at non-manufacture of consent but just management, then where is how do we really analyze the situation? And second thing is that I think the idea of voting for the lesser evil is not as empty an idea.
It's
right?
not literally.
No. I think it's a brilliant idea,
yeah.
Because what the opposite of that is that you vote for the more evil. I don't know, for the lack of. So I don't know if
better among the worst.
Yeah, because if the idea is that like in this party you vote for somebody who's like worse, in this election you vote for somebody who's worse, the next election the other party knows we have to be like even. I don't know what's the word is.
It's a phrase which is not to be taken literally. It means you have to neutralize this evil. Now how you do it is different.
But then, what's the analysis of warfare, welfare?
I think you John Rawls did. He's a philosopher. I'm quoting him. Yeah.
Thank you. I personally agree with the thought that we have to choose the lesser evil, because we never get a choice between good and evil. Not only in politics, but also in life. All decisions in life are based on that. Now, coming to the question of, Hartosh made the point that in 1984 it all started. The violence against the Sikhs, the violence against a minority community. Well, I was in Canada at that time, so I can't claim, first-hand experience, though in Canada we did have ripples of that. But it's my view that, and here I go by what Blaise Pascal said, about, had Cleopatra's nose been shorter, the whole face of the earth would have been different. Now, my view is that whether 1984 violence occurred or not, what happened in Gujarat would have occurred. It is too simplistic a historical reasoning to go from event A and to event B. And as already explained, that sort of violence and the reason for that violence with the goal of creating a Hindu Rashtra. Well, that has been there for a long time, and I end by the observation, it's an unfamiliar fact of history that the division of India along the basis of religion was first propounded by Lala Lajpat Rai in the early 1920s. And one question, democracy implies an electorate intelligent and alert. Do we have it? I don't see much sign of it, and I am sorry to say, media are not helping.
Can I ask Mark sitting here? He said something about media not fulfilling. I'm sure we'll all. Would you like to say something?
There are exceptions.
No. Would you like to say something about the role of media?
Well, I don't want to defend media, certainly.
No, absolutely. No one is expecting it.
Certainly not.
We are not. So
but I have a small question which helps understand media also. The anti-Muslimism in India, I have seen from my school days. Despite that, when I was not even born, in 1916, Jinnah and Tilak could sign a pact which made Ajin Rani write a book, Comrades in Arms, or something equivalent. In 1947, after partition also, Maharashtra continued to consistently and stridently oppose not only Nathuram Godse, but the whole idea of Nathuram Godse or his ideology. Maharashtra always stood for, till that time, Ambedkar, Phule and Shahu Maharaj. It did not endorse. Brahmins were never a majority. They were Dalits, they were Marathas, they were OBCs, and they were Muslims. And yet Maharashtra did not endorse the upper caste, Brahminical idea of Nathuram. It always voted against that idea. Maharashtra was known throughout as stridently anti-Hindu Rashtra project, till very recently. Another point, I do not recall any time in Maharashtra or Delhi also, anti-Sikh sentiment in society, till it happened in 1984 in a most violent way, or you can say it happened somewhere between 1979 to 1984, which led to murder of Indira Gandhi. There is no anti-Sikh sentiment. Forget anti-Muslim sentiment in Maharashtra or even elsewhere, because that's why the Hindu Rashtra project did not take off. At which point the trigger against Sikh happened, and at which point, despite partition, the anti-Muslim sentiment took such a violent shape. It was there always. As I told you, in my school days, there was anti-Muslim sentiment. It was not as if it is not there, but it always remained in the background. It always was defeated, quote unquote, electorally you call it or politically you call it. That sentiment was defeated. Strident Hindu Rashtra sentiment was consistently defeated. Suddenly, as he said, after 1984, after 1992 Babri, and after 2002 Godhra, everything has changed. So can we not say that actually the cutoff point for today's situation is the Rath Yatra, which began in 1990, which led to Babri, which led to Godhra, which led to 2014, rather than 1984, though I will not disagree with the essential content.
I think some, if I can respond, because we are getting into a lot of questions on the same subject, I hardly want to make it a discussion about 84 or violence against the Sikhs. I think the essential point is being missed. First of all, to say whether 84 happened or not, it's very difficult. I mean, it is on the level of a question if partition happened or didn't happen, Gandhi died or not died. It has happened, and it had certain consequences. My point was, do not look at the minority that was being targeted. Please look at the majority that was created and the strategy used for creating that majority. I'm saying those were the methods that became used in that same fashion of a corporate campaign of an enemy selected outside. The hatred against Muslims was always there, of course. But that it could be created so extensively, when you could manufacture hatred against Sikhs and succeed electorally, then how much easier is it to create a platform of hatred against Muslims and win? And that is why I'm saying it was a framework that provided the first lessons in a manufactured election with a manufactured campaign with a direction of hate. The other strand that you're in is a real strand, but here I'm talking of how you craft a majority through the creation of a hate and use it through electoral means. And that, I think, is a paradigm for what has been done far more successfully by the BJP, where the grounds are far easier to use. That is
Doesn't it change now? Just one point. From 14 to 19, doesn't it change? Because we saw it being the fact that it's now even more obvious that it was manufactured.
May I say something? Not a question. You know what Hartosh said is perfectly correct. For 3 days on television channels, we saw those 40 bodies of 41 soldiers. Then when Parikar dies, every TV channel is carrying photographs of his body, as if there are no other news. I mean, it was, where was the news? It was, I think, a Sunday or two. So this cult of Murda Parasto ki Basti, the model is 84 when they showed Indira Gandhi's body lying for 3 days. But it's happening again and again under this government, and all I can understand is that instructions were given to TV channels. Koi aur khabar hi nahi thi.
They showed Sridevi for 5 days.
He was the chief minister.
They showed Sridevi for 5 days.
No, but what does it mean? Every time a politician dies, we are going to have photographs of his body on TV for days on end? I mean, it's very confusing.
Ma'am, this is for Neera. Ma'am, could you, I don't know, you mentioned that there is only one incident of lynching happened back in 2014. I don't know, so could you tell me which one it is? Also, I'm a little uncomfortable with the notion that incidents of lynchings have suddenly proliferated post-2014. Definitely, the very act of lynching someone, that has of course become more and more common, so much that we've become kind of almost immune to it. You know, but the institutional legitimacy of violence happening in the name of the cow it's very much there. The bulwark of it is there in the laws which prohibit cow slaughter, and it's there out, I think, almost 18 of the states in India, and these laws have existed for quite some time, since the 90s, and I did a study some time ago when these laws originated, and it's been there for quite some 60s to 90s, it's been there. And if you see the text of the law, it's very clearly stated that any police officer can enter into any property on mere suspicion that a cow is being transported, not even slaughtered, on mere suspicion of that it's been transported. They can enter and they can, do surveillance, and they can even take action. So I'm a little uncomfortable with saying that, ये vigilantism हो रहा है और ये चंद गुंडे हैं जो अचानक उठ गए. The very fact that, I mean, it's hardly possible even to distinguish between who is a car sevak and who is an ordinary, just anybody on the road. सड़कों पे कोई ऐसे चल रहा है वो भी lynch कर सकता है. जुनैद के साथ क्या हुआ? It was just on a train which happened. He was just lynched on the train. The other day, Gurgaon mein, they just entered a Muslim's house and they just entered. So the idea of violence as a spectacle, it's become, I don't know, it's spectacular violence, is it common violence? So I don't know how to really respond. So if you could just respond, and also to which was the one incident of lynching prior to 2004.
I think Praveen is here, he has statistics on lynching. Am I right? There were only one case?
I think NDTV you mentioned.
NDTV, Srinivasan Jain's data. And on that TV, on that media.
I think the data is available, it's in public domain. I'm not sure about the one lynching that happened before 2014. I don't have
one
the
lynching,
details.
perhaps which
One
was
lynching
reported before
Yeah,
it can't be that there was
So lynchings, I mean, in
What
some
is that media
forms,
space which gives
India spent
India spent? Now become common. I mean, that's what okay. Of course, that thing should be out to the director, because I agree with you.
So moving quickly from moving quickly from analysis to prescriptive politics, between reform or reforming the majority as opposed to sticking up for dissidents and paying a heavy price. Where do we go from here, given the situation?
Are there more questions?
So, we have heard buzzwords, bywords, catchphrases, on 3-4 words. Secularism, monarchism, majorityism. There is something beyond that. First, if somebody can enlighten us about the etymology of secularism, as to when it originated, when it started. So now you only claim here in India only one word through which this nation can be defined. When it originated, what is the complete background?
1928, Motilal Nehru Constitution.
And what was before that? Before
They were
1928?
having communal rights, they said they had state neutrality towards religion. The Motilal Nehru Constitution,
And the-
all party meetings.
And then these terms, well, they have been used, incorporated more so after 1947, after the partition of India. And these terms have not done anything good to the country. Monarchism, majorityism, don't you think these are terminological inexactitudes? And they are more or less political terms, not religious. But our country has been divided on the basis of religion. That such a religion is a minority, such a religion is a majority. So when we count all these things, the country doesn't become a secular state, or you call it by any other name. I think these are terminological inexactitudes which are not going to do good to the country as a whole. Whether we are in minority in 8 states of India, Hindus, and Muslims are minority in different states of India, another community is a minority in different states of India, and Karan Singh says when I go to Jammu Kashmir, I am in a minority. So I don't think by using repetitively these terminological inexactitudes, we can really create a society which will be good for the country or for the people as a whole.
We have space for maybe just one more question. Concluding remarks.
Yeah, I think I would leave it to Professor Irfan to make concluding remarks.
I think what probably we have not given sufficient attention beyond the issue of majority and minority, there is also the question of nation and nationalism itself. And I think, and it is not just about India, but nationalism also has its seamy side. And although people have made a distinction between civic nationalism and ethnic nationalism, but this idea of nation nationalism itself is based on the prior notion of an insider and outsider. And if we take a long durée perspective, which the book put forwards, in some ways we can even trace it back to the writings of Raja Ram Mohan Rai himself, who is the first person to describe Muslim as outsider to Indian nation, and Hindu becomes original inhabitants. Now, the point here is not that there is a seamless continuity, but elements of those things are present. It did not emerge in 1950 or even in 1984. It has a much longer genealogy. Now, the second point I want to make is that the contemporary politics has to be seen in conjunction with neoliberalism. In fact, one cannot think about it. I was very much struck in 2012 when Tony Abbott, who won election to become Prime Minister of Australia, and I was very curious how the newspaper is going to report it. On the front page of The Age, which is the most popular newspaper published from Melbourne, you know what was the title? Australia under new management. Now, one has to take this language very seriously, that if the job of the Prime Minister is to simply manage, then the question is, what are they managing, right? And this language of management, and by the way, the term governance itself was given by IMF in the 1980s, and then it became popular, and so this deep connection between neoliberalism and aggressive form of religious nationalism is not simply unique to India, but it is also operating in other forms in other countries as well. Now, the historical bit, and as the point that you made, the insider, outsider, or even the issue of cow, I mean, Gyan Pandey has written extensively about it, how the issue of cow has been there central to Indian national movements from 19th century onwards. So these are not issues which have cropped up, the previous night. It has a longer genealogy. And I think one needs to interrogate these questions in greater detail. Now, your point about manufacturing and managing, I don't think these are two polar opposites. You can manage by manufacturing, and you can manufacture by managing. They go hand in hand. And this is precisely the term, I think Monobina probably would be attentive to this. One of the things which we have done in this book is to also come up with a new concept which is called the designer democracy. So much like our clothes and dresses, now we have entered a phase of designer democracy. You remember Tony Abbott saying when he won the election, the same day he told his party elected MPs that today is the first day of electoral mobilization for the next election. So this designer democracy runs on this idea of permanent advertising, and that is where the role of the media and everything. And then citizens, they become like, it is all the language of the salesman. Politicians become advertisers. There is hardly any idea of citizen or civic debate. You become consumers or object of, like, as a market. So I think it is this deep imbrication of history, nationalism, neoliberalism, and of course religion being a very central theme to this mobilization. And I think it is these intersections which we should take into account to arrive at our contemporary moment.
Thank you, Professor Ahmed. Thank you, Professor Karanko. Big thanks to Monobina for being such a patient moderator. Thank you, Hartosh. Thank you, Professor Chandhoke.